Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I'm with Jay Boberg, one of the proprietors of Nicolas Jay of the Willamette Valley. Welcome, Jay, and tell us a little bit about this brand of yours.
Well, thank you, Allison. It's a pleasure to be with you. Nicolas Jay is a partnership. It's a partnership among friends. This winery was a sort of dream of mine, and I have the good fortune of having been friends with one of the most talented winemakers, Jean-Nicolas Me of Yamhill-Carlton, since the 1980s, which kind of gives away too much here. It tells you exactly how old I am. He went to school with my sister at university in Pennsylvania at Penn. And so I was in the music business at that time and met Jean-Nicolas and became friends. I was already very much into wine, very much a fan of wine. I didn't really have much money, so my access to wine was sort of limited by my budget, but I was very passionate about it and had learned a lot and knew about his domain, Yamhill-Carlton, his family's domain, which at the time, the wines were being made by Henri Jaillet at Yamhill-Carlton at that time. So you have to fast forward many years. We have a long, long friendship. He would stay with me, visit me in California. I was perfectly excited to be part of his Yamhill-Carlton trips. And then I would visit him in Burgundy as well when I was traveling around for music and for wine. I did have the great benefit of being in a business where I had to travel the world. And so I was able to, on those trips, always often work in an ability to go to a wine region, go visit with vintners, and so consequently, I was able to visit him in Burgundy, many times over the years. And Nicolas Jay, the first vintage was 2014. We started working on this really in 2012, 2011. Spent a bunch of time in Oregon together, trying to make sure that we could source the fruit and access the fruit that he needed to make, as he said, a world-class wine. He said, we don't want to do it if we can't. So let's make sure that we really can get the fruit. He'd been to Oregon a few times before. I was certainly very well aware of the wines and the evolution of the region and the evolution of the winemaking and the cooler climate styles that were emanating from there, and certainly had a sense that the potential for Oregon was really something quite extraordinary. And many people up there were achieving that or striving for it, and it was something that seemed like a good sense thing to do.
So you live in Los Angeles, he lives in Burgundy, and you found a common ground in Oregon, in the Willamette Valley. And you were saying that you source fruit. I'm curious, do you have plans to have a vineyard? Where are you sourcing from, and what are you producing?
So we produce Pinot Noir and are just about to launch our first Chardonnay. But the truth is that our initial vision was to spend the first few years using only sourced fruit so that we could learn the region. And you're right, I've lived in Los Angeles for, now 40 years or more. But I now divide my time up between Oregon and in Los Angeles. Jean-Nicolas and I bought a small house in Dundee. I spend many months of the year up there, including all of harvest. And in fact, I'm going there day after tomorrow for a period of time. When we were going through the process of visiting all these different vineyards and visiting people's cellars and having the ability to taste wine that was made from these different sites within the different AVAs. As you know, Oregon is broken into different AVAs, very much following the French AOC model. And we had the good fortune, and I think mainly because of Jean-Nicolas' reputation, most of the winemakers and vintners were excited to have him come into their cellar and taste. We had the great fortune of tasting fruit from over 200 different vineyards during those 2 years. So we really had a thorough sampling of what the different AVAs and the different climates, and also we had different samplings of different winemakers' approach. People who were using 50% new oak, people who were using 100% new oak, people who were using whole cluster, people who were destemming completely, people that, kept real cool cellars, people that didn't worry about temperature whatsoever. I mean, we really had the ability to taste wine made by a wide variety of styles and approaches. And through that, we designated or selected these vineyards that we thought was going to make the best wine. We always envisioned making a blend out of the Pinot Noir, unusually in the sense that our flagship is our blend, where in many of the wineries in Oregon, as far as that goes, in California, these sort of flagships are a single vineyard, a particular single vineyard. And certainly Jean-Nicolas deals solely with single vineyards in Europe. There's, other than the Bourgogne, there's really no blending involved. But what ended up happening through that process is we discovered a vineyard called Bishop Creek. And we were not able to get any of that fruit. It wasn't available to us. But when we were in that long process and tasting those 200 vineyards, we came across this vineyard and thought it was very unique and very interesting. And about 6 months later, it came up for sale. And so right from the beginning, our very first vintage, 2014, we purchased Bishop Creek. And initially, we only had a little bit of the vineyard because much of the fruit was already committed to other people. But over the years, we've gotten more and more of it. But that is our estate vineyard. And that is a vineyard that we get about 40% of the fruit that goes into our wines.
What is the total acreage of the vineyard?
It's currently about a little over 17 acres. When we bought it, it was about 12 and change. It was almost all Pinot Noir, much of it planted a long time ago for Oregon, 1987, 1988. Much of it is on its own roots, which is a very interesting aspect. And we're very lucky, I'm knocking on wood right now, that we do not have phylloxera. We're not silly enough to think that we will never get it. There was an awful lot of own-rooted plantings in Oregon from the beginning in the 70s and 80s. Almost all of that has gone to the way of phylloxera and has been pulled out, but we're fortunate to have one of the healthiest vineyards around and as it relates to own-rooted. They also had planted Pinot Gris, but a bit later, about 10 years later in the late 90s. And a little more than 3 years ago now, maybe even almost 4, we grafted that Pinot Gris over to Chardonnay. We also cleared and planted a few more acres of Chardonnay. And we also expanded the Pinot Noir holdings in this one section. So we're now up to about 17 acres, and it's about 13 of Pinot Noir and 4 of Chardonnay, rough numbers.
And you're still sourcing fruit from other vineyards as well? And
we are still sourcing fruit from other vineyards.
And what is your total case production?
It's about 3,000 cases. In terms of, it varies a little bit from vintage to vintage. Mother Nature giveth and taketh away depending upon the vintage, but rough numbers, it's about 3,000.
And what markets can we find your wine in?
In America, we're in about a dozen states: New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Illinois, Florida, Texas, just launched in Arizona, California, Oregon, and Washington. We just launched in Montana as well. And we're looking to be coming into, in Maryland. I forgot Maryland and DC. We're looking to go into Virginia, Georgia, and Ohio are the next ones that are up for us to expand into. With our limited production, and also there's not very many of us. I mean, Nicolas Jay is a vast organization of 5 people, one of whom lives in France, and 3 of who live full-time in Oregon, and 1 who splits his time between Oregon, Los Angeles, and what seems like on the road a lot with selling the wine and doing tastings and being involved in all of that. But we have limited capacity, and our goal is to really develop relationships in the markets and really get to know our customers. We're trying to make, we are, I believe, making a wine that is really for people who are enthusiastic and share our enthusiasm, who really are interested in what Jean-Nicolas and Tracy and myself are doing in terms of the wine, and people who we can develop relationships with and who really are part of the Nicolas Jay family, and it's really working. I mean, we sold out the 14 vintage, the 15 vintage is almost gone. We're just launching the 16, and it's been fantastic to build these relationships. We have many, many people that have become our ambassadors in these different markets.
Well, we're hoping that you'll get some new followers after listening to this. So I want you to tell me a little bit about yourself. You were saying how you met Nicolas back when you were in college. Tell me what your first memory relevant to wine is. I don't know if it dates back to that or predates meeting him.
It definitely predates meeting him. My first experience with wine that really meant something was I went up to the Napa Valley with a friend who had worked this is when I was in college, had worked summers at a wine distributor. And we went up and did some tastings. I don't think I was even 21. I think I might have been 20. And went to actually Robert Mondavi and actually met him and had him talk about food and wine and tasted, I believe it was the 74 Cabernet. And then they made a Pinot Noir that I believe might have been 72. I can't remember. But I got really enthralled. I loved to cook and was always into food. And I think that really was the beginning of the spark. And I would give a great deal of credit to another guy named Kermit Lynch, who is a top distributor and just a real passionate wine lover who has an incredible palate. And I think really was a pioneer in really recognizing some of the great, mainly European, almost all European talents, winemaking talents. And I got to meet him early on and started visiting a shop and buying wines, and he was very much into music, and became someone who I learned a lot from, and was able to. He and his folks helped set up many meetings with me to be able to visit vineyards around the world, where my education, and a lot of that happened even before I met Jean-Nicolas.
Do you remember what the most memorable wine was that you drank and what the occasion was?
Ever?
Yeah, sure. What comes to mind? Maybe the first most memorable or more recent?
Well, I think the most extraordinary wine experience I've ever had was I had a bottle of 1978 Roumier Bonmar that to this day is sort of in my mind the pinnacle of what a fantastic bottle of wine could be. I wish I could afford to buy Bonmar from Roumier these days, but that was back when you could pick these up for a little bit more reasonable price. But my wine tastes are quite varied. Before we started Nicolas Jay, I was very involved in the wine community. I had our family vacation home was up in Napa Valley in Yountville. I got involved with the Napa wine auction. I was in the music business, which I'm sure we'll talk about here in a minute. And so I got a lot of the artists who performed at the Napa wine auction. Therefore, I met tons of Napa winemakers, and some of my dearest friends and some of the people that I picked their brain a lot before we launched Nicolas Jay are wineries up in Sonoma and Napa. So wine has been very important to me. I'm part of many, many wine groups, have been. I don't consider myself to be a wine collector because I really am not a big fan of people who build up these cellars as sort of like these trophy things. I have purchased wine, I have wine, but it's all about drinking. It's all about sharing and all about the experience of really tasting these different wines. And my tastes are very wide. It's not like I'm only a French person or I'm only a, whatever, California or whatever it might be. I really enjoy wines and have had the great joy of visiting Spain and New Zealand and Corsica and Croatia and Italy, of course, and of course been in many of the regions of France and frankly most of the wine regions in America as well.
Traveling the world abroad as you have done, who do you think drinks the best in terms of quality?
Which sort of culture, if you will? That's a really tough one. I do think that the European culture, whether you're in France or Italy or Austria or Germany or anywhere, actually, although I think Germans, although they make great wine, I don't think it's quite the same. Their culture is such that wine plays a more important role in their day-to-day lives. I think there's more of an emphasis put on wine in certainly the French culture, the Italian culture. But I think the Americans, it's changing. I mean, wine consumption is going up in America. I think the idea of a bottle of wine being kind of highlight of a meal and a meal in of itself becoming the highlight of an evening. I mean, it seems to me, again, I'll show my age, but 30 years ago, you'd go out to a really nice restaurant and have a meal. I always thought that was the event. I didn't need to go see a movie or a concert or something else. I mean, I obviously went to lots of concerts, but my point is that the meal in of itself was the entertainment, if you will. That was the experience, and the focus of the entire evening would be on the meal. That was not the case 30 years ago. Most people in America, that wasn't the case. It was the case in Europe. Mm-hmm. And so I think what's happened is that America has caught up in the sense that now it is the whole foodie culture, the more emphasis, the celebrity chef, for lack of a better term, but the more emphasis on chefs and the dining experience. I think things like Open Table and Resi and things, there's an entire culture around food and dining and thus wine that where it is very common today for the event of the weekend to go out to dinner and have a great bottle of wine. More and more people are buying wine and bringing those wines into the restaurants and or buying nice wines off the list. I think people are putting much more emphasis on that now. And so in a way, as much as I answered the question that it would be the French and the Italians and so forth who have that culture, I think America is making great strides in terms of catching up.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
I don't know about perfect variety, but I can certainly tell you that, if I was told I had, 24 hours to live, I would be drinking pretty much nothing but Pinot Noir and Chardonnay for those 24 hours.
Oh, well, I have a question later for you. I think we have the answer already. But what is your thought on wine critics and scores?
I think wine critics are an important part of the puzzle, or important part of the process. I think like any critic, whether it's a movie critic, a music critic, a wine critic, a restaurant critic, I think there are some who are better than others, who take their job more seriously, who spend much more time and effort and are more thoughtful than others. I don't think that anybody should be buying wine or not buying wine based solely on what a critic says. I think they're good reference points, any more than you would necessarily, buy a car based on one review of the car. I think it's good data points, and I think that they're an important part of the community.
So getting down to you as a consumer, red, white, or rosé?
It's a tough one, but I mean, at the end of the day, I would say red.
Still or sparkling wine?
Still.
Food and wine pairing, how do you approach that? You said you cook a lot and obviously you like to go out and eat. Do you feel that there are some hard and fast rules? Do you think that white wine and fish, red wine and meat, and you don't break the rules? How do you approach that?
I think there are some things that work and some things that don't. I'm not a big fan of rules per se. Like, for instance, this idea of fish with white wine. Pinot Noir is fantastic with certain fish, especially salmon, but there are many different fish of which Pinot Noir goes great. Does it make sense to crank out a 15% alcohol Cabernet to drink with your fish? Probably not. I mean, that's not going to really be advantageous. By the same token, I'm really not a fan of high vinegar, really strong vinegar content in foods when you're trying to drink a delicate wine, especially delicate Pinots and delicate Chardonnays. I think that vinegar can really impact your palate and so forth. I mean, some people have things about artichokes and how artichokes can impact that. There are certain sort of things that make it challenging. I believe that heavily spiced food, my palate, I can't speak for everybody, but if my palate's being blown out by spice, I'm not going to be able to taste the nuances of various different wines. I mean, I suppose, there's some wines where the wine flavor and so forth cuts through. And so consequently, I do believe that like Alsatian wines tend to be good with Chinese food and things along, Thai and things along those lines. But, like people say, well, what do you pair with Indian food? It's like I pair beer. is what I pair with Indian food. I know there are some high-end Indian restaurants and they're very, very serious about their wines, but I have never personally found a wine pairing with Indian food that I enjoy as much as beer. And at the end of the day, it's about enjoyment.
Absolutely. So what do you think that a non-drinker loses out by not tasting your wines?
Well, I think the thing that's unique about our wine is that you have the opportunity to taste a wine that has been crafted by, and he would never say this, but I can say this, one of the top makers of Pinot Noir in the world. I mean, the Mayo-Camazé wines are, you can say they're top 5, they're top 10, whatever. The point is he certainly is in the elite group of makers of Pinot Noir. And he has now gone to a different region that is not Burgundy. For those of you who want to, so does it taste like Burgundy? It's Oregon. But yet he's brought his palate, as he says, and he's brought his knowledge and his experiences. And so how we're farming is very similar to what he does in many cases in Burgundy. How we make the wine is almost identical to what he does in Burgundy. There's a couple things we do differently, primarily the oak. The oak is only about 1/3, somewhere between 30 and 35% in Oregon, where in France, in Burgundy, he's anywhere from 50 to 100%, depending on the cuvée. So I think the opportunity to experience a wine made by that kind of gifted winemaker in a place like Oregon, which has such a wonderful reputation for being a perfect site to grow Pinot Noir, that's what they would be missing. And at a price point that is significantly less than what you're paying for the wines of Burgundy.
So there's, we say that each vintage tells a different story. In other words, there are more things, or let me ask you, do you think there are more things that repeat themselves or more things that are unique from one vintage to another?
Well, I think one of the things about Nicolas Jay is that we believe that the wines should reflect the vintage. And in Oregon, no two vintages are alike. In fact, most anywhere, no two vintages are alike. And so consequently, the wines are not going to be identical. There are plenty of wines, and I'm not going to name names, but there's plenty of wines out there, very prominent wines, very expensive wines that taste the same year in and year out. And, you walk into that steak shop or steak house, and they want to get that certain wine, and they want it to taste the same every year. And God bless. I'm not condemning that. That is a product. They've made it for a consumer. That consumer knows what they want. That's not what we do. We are much more from an artisan standpoint, making a wine that is taking advantage of the source in terms of the soil and the weather and what happens, the age of those vines and all the various different little nuances that go into making each vintage individual and unique. And so consequently, I don't believe two things happen exactly the same way at the same time. And I think if you drink our 14, our 15, our 16, it'd be tough to drink the 17 because it hasn't been bottled yet. But if you were able to drink it, you would definitely taste differences. You would know they're made by the same winemaker. There's certainly a consistency of style, but one of them is a little bit more fruity. Another one of them has a little bit more of the terroir and the soil. One of them's a little lower in alcohol. One's a little bit higher. I mean, there's variations that are really reflective of the vintage, and we do not try to diminish those differences.
So if space aliens were to land on your property, what is the wine that you'd want to present to them?
I would present them with our Willamette Valley, our flagship. The 2015 is drinking fantastic. We're sold out of the 14, but I could offer them a bottle from the library, I guess. And it would definitely be the Willamette Valley. We do make 3 single vineyards in very small quantities, about 100 cases of each. Bishop Creek, the Nysa, and the Momtazi. Those are not because they're better. It's really so that people that are really into it, that are really want to dig deeper, can understand the different flavors and the sources and taste the particular sources from which the Willamette Valley is crafted.
So you said that you spend harvest up in the Willamette Valley, and I'm wondering, do you have any good luck rituals that you perform, you and your team, before harvest starts?
I don't have any good luck rituals, but I can tell you this. Music is played throughout the harvest. We do a lot of cooking. We shockingly don't drink that much wine. We tend to drink a lot of beer during the harvest. But, I think one of the great things about harvest is that being a very small winery and having, very small staff, we bring in a lot of volunteers and people that we say the pay is crap, but you'll eat really well, you'll drink really well, and we put them up in our house. And so we have a bunch of family and friends and some customers and people who will come out, and they'll be there anywhere from 3 to 5 days helping us work with the harvest. And so I think what is the best thing about harvest at Nicolas Jay is the community. And we've had people fly from Toronto, come from New York, come from where else? One from Europe. One guy came from New Zealand to be part of our harvest. So it's that community and that sort of all pulling in together to create something really special. That's what I really enjoy about harvest. That and not sleeping.
So, many producers walk in their cellars and they'll talk to the wines in the barrel, or they'll walk through their vineyards. And I know music plays a big part. Do you sing or play music to your vines or to your wine?
I would never subject our wines to my singing. That much is for sure. No, we have a lot of music going. I'm the kind of person, and as I mentioned, I was in the music business for a long time. I have music on wherever I go. You walked in to do this interview, and I had music on. So there's plenty. This wine is subjected to a lot of music, but it's not me singing. I should probably mention. I was a musician. I started playing guitar when I was 7, classical guitar, and got pretty decent. My parents didn't make me do it. I actually loved it, and I loved playing the guitar. It was a nylon string, classical guitar, not rock guitar. And in high school, I managed to go see The Who play Quadrophenia. That's just how old I am, because I was actually 15 when Quadrophenia went around. And that changed my view on music in a big way. And I was that kid in school who spent all his money on music, buying records. I had stereo equipment, all my guitars and so forth. And when I got to university, I got involved with the concert program at UCLA and started booking all the shows. I booked the first Talking Head show in California. We booked the Police. We booked a lot of jazz things, Bob Marley. We did some really fantastic stuff. Peter Gabriel's his first solo stuff. Really, really cool things. And through that, I met this guy, Miles Copeland, who managed the Police. And he asked me if I wanted to start this is the Christmas of my junior year, when I was figuring out which business school I was going to go to. And he says, "You want to start a record label?" And I thought that was just the best idea, for better or worse. My parents didn't necessarily agree. So in my senior year, I spent releasing our first record, which is the Buzzcocks singles, Going Steady. And then we signed Oingo Boingo. I signed REM. We had the Go-Go's. We had the English Beat, The Alarm, Wall of Voodoo, Concrete Blonde.
It's all the
Cannibals.
All the music I grew up with.
We were really blessed. And the thing was that Miles and I we only signed bands we loved. And I think it's what really made us successful. We weren't always right. I can certainly point out some bands that I thought were fantastic that I loved, and we signed them and recorded them and put them out in the world and did our best to get them, some traction. And for whatever reason, it didn't stick. But the fact is that our batting average was pretty extraordinary, and the list of bands that we had was really remarkable. And we were very, very blessed to have the opportunity to work with these talented people. But that sort of philosophy of chasing what you love, and I think when I would go around the country or the world, as I'm doing now on behalf of Nicolas Jay, people can tell the difference when it's an authentic enthusiasm. When I would walk in and I would play, a song from the first REM album, and I'd have some jackass tell me that the guy can't sing, or he can't understand the lyrics, or whatever it was. And when I would tell him, passionately how extraordinary I thought this band was, and why there's an audience for this band, and why they're pioneering, and that his audience on his radio station, or her audience, as the case may be, really deserves to get a chance to listen to this. I think one of the reasons why I was successful, or we were successful, is because they actually believed it. They believed it was so authentic and so genuine. And I'm seeing that now with the wine. Jean-Nicolas and I are not trying to make a wine that fits a marketplace. We're not trying to make a wine that we think will go on this wine list. We're trying to make a wine that we want to drink. Mm-hmm. And we're just hoping that if we want to drink it, if it's a wine that we think is a caliber, and obviously Jean-Nicolas can drink whatever he wants, and I have access to some pretty good wines, but if we want to drink this, then we're hoping there's enough other people that agree with us. And so consequently, I think that has a lot to do with why we've been successful.
I think it's pretty special when you're a little kid and you know what you want to do when you grow up and you actually get to do it. And so compliments for being able to succeed in that, and then to find a second career as an adult and find that same passion. It's pretty extraordinary to find it twice in life.
I 100% agree. And you've kind of stolen my line. That's what I oftentimes will say, is that one of the greatest blessings is that when your avocation becomes your vocation. And I got to do that once with music. And it was hard work. I'm not saying, I did the IRS records deal, and then we sold that. And then I ran MCA Universal for over a decade, joined the sort of dark side, the big corporate thing. But I enjoyed that as well and got to work with amazing artists. At that label, and we had the Roots and Mary J. Blige and Blink-182 and Sigur Rós and Common, and I'm leaving out a ton of unbelievable bands that we got to sign. But to be able to do something that you love and actually get paid for it. And so, to be honest with you, when my music days were, I don't say over, but when I got to the point where that was, not something that I wanted to continue to do, you're left with these options, when you're, 50, whatever years old, what do you want to do? And the reason why I ended up deciding to go after this, even though the wine business is difficult, there's a million stories of how do you make a small fortune, start out with a large fortune, go in the wine business. There's all these sort of things, not that I had a large fortune, but there's a lot of challenges, but ultimately the ability to work with your friend. The no asshole rule is in full effect in my life. So if I just don't have time for it in that regard. And the ability to work with a dear friend who also happens to be amazingly talented and also be in a business that I have real passion for, just seemed like the right thing to do. And we're doing well. I don't know if you could say that my second career has been a success yet. We're not actually there quite yet. We're not quite making money, but we're very, very close. And I think we will be by the end of 2019 making money. And I'm very blessed in that regard.
Well, considering you worked in the wine industry and worked with so many amazing bands, I'm not going to ask you who your favorite singer or group is, because that's probably like picking your favorite wine or favorite child. But I will say, I will ask if you have a favorite film about wine.
A favorite film about wine? Well, the most impactful film about wine is clearly Sideways. I mean, nothing impacted the wine business more than Sideways, for better or for worse, and it's certainly very beneficial for Pinot Noir. But I don't know about a favorite film about wine. I mean, there have been some great documentaries. Obviously, the Somme series is there, but I don't know. I don't really have a good answer for you. One thing we started to talk about, but I didn't really finish. You asked me where you could buy Nicolas Jay wine, and I gave you the states, but we didn't talk about overseas. And I think this is important. Unlike many domestic wines who, California wines or Oregon or Washington, where they'll sell, 95, even 100% of their wine domestically. We sell about 25 to 30% of our wine overseas. Now, granted, this is because of Jean-Nicolas' reputation, but right from the get-go, we have an amazing distributor in Japan who has done great work in Japan. We've done very well there. We're in Australia. We're in Korea. We're in China. Jean-Nicolas and I went to Shanghai and to Hong Kong, and we've now had 2 successful vintages in those markets. London and England is a terrifically successful market. We work with Fields, Morris & Verdon and Berry Brothers, the oldest retailer in the UK. I just got back from there. I was there in November. They've been very, very successful. And then the shock of all shockers is we're actually selling wine in France. And I would have lost all of my money betting, because if someone had said to me, do you think you're going to sell, 150 cases of wine in France? I would have bet the farm. There's 0 chance, not even 1% chance. And I have been so wrong about how our wines have been received in France. We're on the wine list in several 3-star Michelin restaurants in Paris. And throughout the country, we had to actually get a distributor. Jean-Nicolas was selling them himself through Mayo Camazet at the beginning, but now he's I can't deal with it. We got to get a distributor. And so it's really been rewarding how the rest of the world has accepted our wine and seems to be enthusiastic. Those markets are growing at the same rate that the states that we're in America that we're actually selling are growing. They're all growing at about the same rate.
Wow, that's amazing. You don't hear that very often of a 3,000 case producer having such an international. Then congratulations. So I'm curious, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received? It could be from any part of your life and from anyone.
I would say the best piece of advice is to treat other people like you would wish to be treated. Coming up at a very young age in the music industry and having IRS records where we were sort of the indie, the underdog, the upstart, a lot of people didn't take us seriously. And so half of the challenge was trying to getting access to the people at radio stations, getting access to the people that were the decision makers at retail or whatever at the time. And one of the things that I did that paid unbelievable dividends was I treated that receptionist or that lower level person in those organizations like they were kings and queens. And those people then grew up to become players in the industry in various different roles, and they never forgot that. And that is something, seeing that happen, not only did I get that advice, I think from my mother actually, but not only did I get that advice, but seeing it actually pay dividends. It's not just about being a nice guy or a nice gal. It actually works in your business, because what happens is you treat everybody nice and you just never know when they're going to come back and, some person that is the low level person, they end up running the show and they have a great relationship and great respect for you because of how you treated them.
Yeah, we can never underestimate how important relationships play in a business like the wine industry. So if you could offer advice to our listeners today, what kind of advice would you offer them?
Well, two things. One is that to the best of your ability, try to spend your time doing things you really care about. Because you have limited time, and it doesn't seem like you have limited time, but you do have limited time, and you want to be doing things you really care about. And secondly is the best advice I can give is every meal is an opportunity to drink a great bottle of wine, and don't save them. There's no reason to I'm not going to drink that. I'm not going to drink that. Drink whatever you got. If not now, when?
So this is going to be a hard question, I would think, because you have accomplished quite a bit and have a lot to be proud of. But what would you say is your proudest achievement to date in your work?
Well, I'm glad you put the prerequisite of in my work, because I was going to say my kids. I'm so proud of my children. But in my work, I would say the thing I'm the most proud of is the fact that most everybody that has worked at a company that I ran, whether it be IRS or MCA Universal or I guess Nicolas Jay, although it's too early to really tell, most everybody that I worked with has stated again and again that they would come work with me again. And the fact that people learned at those in those organizations, and the fact that people were given, as I used to say, enough rope to hang themselves, so that they got to make mistakes and they got to take chances and they got to learn. That's probably the thing I'm most proud of is all the different people that I've had the joy of working who gave their all working for me at IRS or at MCA, but also got something back and got an experience that they look back on fondly and they recognize that they learned a lot and it was an important part of their career development.
So complete the sentence. A table without wine is like?
Drinking a bottle of wine by yourself. Which is not the way you should be drinking wine.
No, not at all. Not at all. So you've had the pleasure of dining with a lot of famous people, I'm sure, over the years. But I'm curious, if a VIP were to be photographed by paparazzi and they were sitting in a restaurant and in the background of that photo there was a bottle of your wine sitting on the table. From all the walks of life, living or deceased, who would you want that person to be drinking your wine?
Kermit Lynch.
That is a very thought-provoking answer. I've gotten political answers, I've gotten actors, but I like that.
Well, I just think because he has, I have ultimate respect for his palate. I think he has been one of the most astute at recognizing wonderful winemaking and winemakers and wonderful terroir and, spots, locations. And consequently, it would be the sort of vote of respect that I would most cherish for me. Now, it's personal, right? Because I really look up to his taste and his assessment. But I mean, listen, I mean, if I'd love, Michael Stipe or, musicians. I mean, B.B. King's no longer with us, but B.B. King or George Martin. There's different people I could point to, but they're musicians and they're different people. I'd love to have them. But that doesn't really say anything about the wine. Where if Kermit Lynch had chosen to drink our wine, which I hope he does. I hope he already has done this, but that would be the photo I'd want to see.
If you were being sent off to a deserted island, what are 3 wines you would take with you?
Is it hot?
It's the temperature you choose.
Okay. I would bring a... this is a politically challenging question. What 3 wines would I bring? Well, I would definitely bring a Nicolas Jay, just because I would want to have one to drink. And I don't know how long I'm going to be on this island. So, I would want to just sort of have that. I would definitely bring a Burgundy, and I would probably bring a bottle of Mayo Camazet, Von Romanet, Le Brûlé, maybe 1989 or 85 or something along those lines. And I would bring a bottle of Ravenot, Chablis. Doesn't have to be a Clos or something from the Grand Cru, but I would say the Nicolas Jay, a Mayo, Von Romanet, Le Brûlé, and a Ravenot, Chablis. That'd be good. I'd be good.
Those are like glass meal wines.
Well, I don't know how long I'm there for. So, is this an unlimited supply of those wines? I might want to stay on that island.
What is one wine region that you still are looking forward to exploring?
South Africa. I really have become enamored with Chenin Blanc in the last few years. It's a varietal that I had enjoyed but didn't really understand. And I think there's some pretty amazing Chenin Blancs in South Africa. But it's also just an entire wine region that I've talked to people who've been there. I've been to Africa. The irony is I've been to Africa twice. My sister was in the Peace Corps there, and I spent quite a bit of time there on 2 different occasions. But it was when apartheid was still going. So going to South Africa was not an option. So I really want to go there and check it out. And I know they clearly make some great wine, and I'm sure there's plenty to learn.
So we're almost finished, but now we're going to play the fun game that we always play here at Wine Soundtrack, which you're going to be an ace at this since music is such a big part of your world. But I want to name a few different wines, either by varietal or producer, and you tell me what music it makes you think of or what you'd be listening to while you drink it. So let's start with the Chenin Blanc.
I would be listening to Everything But the Girl.
The Chablis.
I would be listening to Joni Mitchell, Hissing of Summer Lawns.
The Von Romani, the Camus.
I would be listening to R.E.M. Murmur.
The Nicolas Jay Estate.
I'd be listening to the English Beat Special Beat Service.
Napa Cab, that Robert Mondavi, like a Robert Mondavi Cabernet.
You mean that bottle of 72 or whatever it was that I had? I'd be listening to Fela Kuti.
Trying to think of all the different wines you talked about because I want to hear all your music suggestions here. You were speaking about a little bit about Alsatian wine.
I'd be listening to Roxy Music.
And to finish it off, let's go with champagne.
I'd be listening to Miles Davis, Porgy and Bess.
I think we just created a great playlist and drinking list.
Exactly.
So, Jay, I want to thank you for joining us here at Wine Soundtrack. And before we go, if you can just remind people where they can find your wines and if it's possible to visit you.
Yes, we'd love to see you at Nicolas Jay. We have a quaint 1920s craftsman home in Dundee, right in the Willamette Valley. It's by appointment only. But if you go to our website at nicolas-jay.com, you can reach out and set up an appointment. We would love to see you. And our wines are available in many of the online sources like wine.com and Porthos and things like that, but as well at many retailers in the states that we talked about earlier, New Jersey. I don't want to go through the whole list again, but and available around the world, as we talked about in various different countries. Well, fantastic. And can we also find you on social media? Yes, our on Instagram, it's Nicolas Jay. And it's at Nicolas Jay. And we have a Facebook page as well. Great. Well, we'll find you on social media and enjoy your wines. And thank you again for joining us today. Thanks so much for coming. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.